through space clusters. May I invite eminent moderator and chair for the session, Honorary Dr. Mike Shott, CB, Chief Scientific Advisor, Department of International Trade, UK. May I request you, sir, to kindly grace the stage with your presence. Inviting eminent speakers, Mr. Paul Febvre, CTO, Satellite Applications, Catapult, UK. Inviting Mr. Abhishek Tiwari, Associate Director, KPMG, and Lead Advisor, Starting Up Program, Government of Uttar Pradesh. Inviting Mr. Mudit Narain, Consultant, Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology, and Dr. Sudheer Kumar M, Director, CBPO, ISRO. And ladies and gentlemen, to get back in time for the next session, we would have to cut down the time duration of the session to 1 hour. And may I hand over to you, sir, Honorary Dr. Mike Shott, to kindly carry over.
I'm rather nervous to start this session, but I'm happy to try this. I'm conscious that at least two of my speakers are not here.
I'm sure they would be joining now.
Let me just make some introductory remarks, if I may. So I thought I'd start just by saying, why are clusters important? Seems to be very logical to start with that angle. Paul, welcome to the stage. So in terms of why clusters are important, I have 8 reasons, and I'd just like to summarize those briefly, then hand over to Paul Febvre, who will be offering a brief keynote presentation, and then we'll have a panel discussion with the other speakers, if that's all right. So why clusters? I think, first of all, proximity and access to facilities are a very key reason why clusters work. If you can share facilities, share and test together, clearly that's a good reason to also be in a cluster. But if you have that proximity, that's helpful for talent exchange. My second reason is I think clusters facilitate a team sport. And what we're seeing is that when we need to innovate in many areas, we need that glue for innovation. Yes, it can cluster around a location. Yes, it can cluster around facilities, but actually it's the team sport that needs to be thought about, particularly if it's got team goals and clear objectives. I think the third reason why clusters are important, it seems to be a very key enabler for scale-up. Now, I say that hesitantly in a country like India. I've been visiting India for many, many years, but actually scale-up internationally is very important, and thinking about how do you scale up the technology from research through technology innovation through to implementation is quite a challenge. And actually, if you have a cluster of skills that can bring it together, the scaling up is a very useful way of handling things. Also, it can be multidisciplinary. And I think when we think about all the capabilities needed in satellite and space, we need to bring together many disciplines: mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, software engineering, some of the telecommunications engineering. It's a multidisciplinary activity, and a cluster approach really helps to bring together those disciplines. I think when it comes to science and technology translation, I've referred to that briefly already, but clusters are often useful because they bring together different companies at different stages in their life, maybe some with experienced entrepreneurship, maybe some with experience of deep tech. So actually that translation role, I think, is another key role. My 6th example, I think, is international partner of choice. I've heard a lot talked about during this conference about inward investment, but actually you sometimes need to have a destination where the inward investment can go. And a cluster is usually a very good place where you can attract inward investment. Sometimes it could be tied with taxation incentives or inward investment incentives, but actually being a cluster as a partner of choice, an international partner of choice, is very good. It's a bit like having a destination that other investors can see. As an international partner of choice, that to me is also a cluster. I think the 7th one I would indicate is that things like skills transfer and development is very important. Some people are developing products and services, and within a cluster you often see that skills transfer and development from the academic side, from the lab side, through innovation, through development, that skills and career support is quite important. And lastly, let me not understate investment. I think clusters can attract investment, not just international investment, but clustering of investment locally around a given sector. Clusters can attract investment from national and international schemes, but sometimes when you're known as a corridor, let's say a Silicon Valley equivalent, you start to imagine that the cluster is very powerful from a fintech point of view, from a space tech point of view, but the investment is the goal. So there are 8 reasons. Now on that point, if Paul Febvre is ready, Paul originally was on the program to offer a keynote, so I'm putting him back as a keynote, and then after Paul's offered his few slides, then let's go back to the panel after that. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sir Michael. While my slides come up, I apologise for being a little bit late. I was invited to participate in another panel just beforehand, which was actually looking at human space flight and deep space. And I was reflecting on the international dimension associated with that scientific endeavour that's enshrined right back at the dawn of the space age within the Outer Space Act. And I think there's fantastic opportunities for collaboration in the science domain, but also in translating science through a technology innovation phase as well. So hopefully my presentation deck will come up in a minute, because I wanted to show you a few of the things that we're doing in the UK, and maybe open the panel with regard to, oh, here it's coming physically. Which of these concepts might be most appropriate to actually bring into focus for India? So just a little bit before we start then. So I'm Chief Technology Officer at the Satellite Applications Catapult. We're a research, it's the one which says India Space Conference, this one, yeah. And press play, fantastic. Perfect, thank you. We're a research and technology organisation that was established 10 years ago to help the translation of research through a technology innovation cycle for exploitation with industry. My background is in satellite communications. I've been working in the field for over 3 decades, British Telecom Research Labs, at Inmarsat, where I was design authority for many of the digital systems that we're using today. 10 years ago, I was asked to help set up a research and technology organisation for the UK, and it felt absolutely the right thing to do, and hence we got started. So the structure of my presentation today, I'm going to cover sort of 4 areas. Here is historical context and the purpose of the innovation landscape, the centres themselves. A little bit about innovation clusters and critical success factors, the things that are important to make sure that they actually are successful. I'm going to ask the question, why space? We had to answer that question in the UK 10 years ago, and I think it's still a valid question to ask today. I think it's even more pertinent today than it was then. And finally, I'll bring in some aspects of the international dimension with some potential and some questions about how do we get working together on the aspect of driving innovation forwards. So a little bit about the historical context. Just over 10 years ago, about 12 years ago, there were significant questions being asked within the UK government about why are we so good at doing research. We're always in the top 10 for just about any research domain that you might choose to examine, but we're actually not very good at translating that research into reality. And at that stage, there was a realization, there were some studies being taken by a number of esteemed professors that looked across industrialists across the world to determine what is the difference, what are we missing? And the idea of coming up with something that an organisation that was independent, sector-oriented, and actually driving that innovation process was established. And at that point then, the Catapult network was established. So we are a set of 9 centres covering a whole range of different domains. Everything from manufacturing, there's 7 centres in manufacturing within that single cluster, all the way through things like digital systems, renewable energy systems, and some aspects of medicine discovery and the like. cell and gene therapy. We're the only one in the space sector, and we're based in Harwell. But you can see the centres are actually covering the whole of the UK, and the important thing here about clusters is they're accessible. So we basically put down a cluster to make it accessible geographically to some of the communities of interest, but also thematically, and maybe we'll come back to that. So from a Catapult perspective, Satellite Applications Catapult, we're not just about the technology. In the middle of this strategy wheel that you can see, there are 3 key areas. The first one is energizing the market. How do you create an awareness and you stimulate the generation of demand? How do you enable businesses to respond to that demand? What do they need in order to actually deliver the capability? And largely that's about understanding regulation, understanding the finance and the scale up and the channel to market. But there's also about bringing technology into focus and empowering its use. I mentioned yesterday the sort of 4 factors in a round table that we think are important. The human factors, the skills that are necessary to drive the innovation forwards, the infrastructure on which you develop the capability, and when this will come into the cluster definition. What is it that is needed by innovators so that they can actually prove the technologies and bring them into a state of readiness for exploitation? The aspect of finance, scaling up. It's really important to understand how organizations move from an idea through to a business proposition to actually take it to a global stage. So mechanisms for putting financial instruments in place are key. One of the things that we did in the UK was to bringing the whole aspect of venture finance for space initiatives and small companies. And that's been really successful. There are more funds being established now. These funds are in excess of £150 million already. And the other aspect is demand stimulation, making sure that there is a recognition of the future need, if you like, for capability. So we are a mission-oriented organisation. We look at challenges that society has and how do we get there. One of the key aspects of these different centres is what is their purpose? We're an applications catapult, which means that we're focusing largely on how do you put services in the hands of communities so that you can actually change the way businesses are working, whether it be in transport or mining or farming, etc. There's a huge range of societal needs that space can help to fulfill. And there's a lack of recognition of this. So what we try and do is to bring that to the attention of those communities of interest, and then we put consortia together that can deliver new services. But also looking at the gaps. And on the gaps, we can see that there's a critical need for new services in space, and that gives us the opportunity to work with the supply chain to develop new technologies and bring them into focus. So we have the infrastructure necessary to do that, and we even run in-orbit demonstration programs that allow small companies to put payloads into space so that they can actually demonstrate their uses. So what are the key success factors for clusters? And there's been quite a number of studies, and you can look up some of this history, about the aspects of creating intensity of skills, intensity of resources and capabilities in order to make it work. And these exist around the globe, and you can see that we've been trying to establish that in the UK and bring that into effect. And it's not a single entity. We're not the only organisation. The Science and Technology Facilities Council, one of the academic support infrastructure, runs two centres in the UK. And I'll just touch on different aspects. It's not just about the technology, it's about knowledge exchange, it's about public and private sector partnerships, it's about policy, informing policy and making sure that the policy framework, the regulatory frameworks, are conducive to delivering success. So here are 2 of the clusters that the Science and Technology Facility entity in the UK, council in the UK, runs. One is Harwell, and that's where we're based. It's near Oxfordshire, and you can see that actually it's not just about space. This is actually a centre where there is significant facilities for doing high energy physics. There are laser facilities, there's a synchrotron, which is an accelerator, there's radiation testing facilities, but there's also other things that go on as well. The campus there, with over 6,000 people on it, has 3 main purposes in terms of the innovation. One's in the telecoms and space sector, one's in the med tech sector, and the other's in the energy sector. And And you can see how bringing those multiple disciplines together creates an energy and translation of ideas and skills. And then there's another facility which is largely focused around high-performance computing, artificial intelligence, and machine learning and the like. So there's the Harwell campus. Just gives you a sense of the scale of this organisation. It is geographically centred near Oxford, but it has outreach across the whole of the UK. So I just want to touch a little bit about the way that we work as a Catapult in terms of trying to crystallise and synthesise the portfolio of work. As I said before, a lot of what we do is looking at the applications domain. And in order to make sure that we're successful to do that, we reach out across the whole of the UK, and we reach out internationally as well. We have a number of different projects which are designed to deliver societal benefit, such as the project in rural Dorset to provide 5G connectivity for coastal communities and for agricultural communities. The Forest Mind project, which is actually looking at sustainability of forestry, for instance, on an international stage, working with partners in countries around the world. We've got a strong emphasis on climate and on things like island economies, where they have critical needs when we're seeing changes from the perspective of what does global warming mean to their communities. So I'll just touch a little bit. We see why is it interesting now more than ever before, apart from the critical need. We have major investment. This is a telecoms centre conference today, or this week, and there is investment in every aspect of the satellite domain, whether they're in the typical geostationary orbits. We're seeing massive investment in new capability. We're seeing new orbits being brought into effect, such as Global Express operating in elliptical orbits to cover the polar regions and some of the MEO orbits. But we're seeing the major investments taking place in low Earth orbit to provide high-density, data-oriented communications. So satellites have been part of the landscape. I've used aviation here as an example, keeping aviators and people traveling across the world safe for the last 30 years. Actually, satellites are critical to the safe operation of aviation for communications, for navigation, and for monitoring the environment. That's both the weather systems and the activity of aircraft. And that investment that's taking place in new satellites, new constellations, is making sure that in the future, the services are indistinguishable from the things that we might get at home. And really that's driving innovation in automation, in electrification of transport networks around the world. But one of the things I'd like to bring into effect, those thousands of satellites, we can't manage in the way that we used to do. It's bringing the requirement for automation in the operational side of those satellites, the aspect of in-orbit servicing and manufacturing in space. And what this means that when you can do things, you can actually create things in space, you can envision a future, which we're already seeing happening it's sort of starting to come into effect, where it's not only about proliferation, it's also about massification, very large structures in space. So for instance, the aspects of data centers, of hotels for space tourism, of manufacturing centers in space, for some of the things that you can do in low gravity or microgravity that you can't do on the Earth, but also for things like space-based solar power. This was mentioned on the first day as one of those recurring initiatives, if you like, understanding. The really interesting construct here is that it can deal with the energy poverty situation that we have across the planet, because you don't need a national grid. You can deliver energy where it's needed, when it's needed. And that's what's becoming fascinating, is that the cost effectiveness of this now, with the reduction in the cost of launch, becomes comparable to offshore renewable energy, but it could deliver energy anywhere. So we've essentially, as a Catapult, we try to look into the future and stimulate the innovation with a good view of achieving some of those long-term goals. So on the far distant horizon, the aspect of space energy, we've established a significant space energy initiative in the UK as a consequence of this ambition. But in fact, it's the spin-offs from this technology that delivers changes across the whole of the innovation landscape for different services, whether they be for Earth observation, for next generation communications networks, direct to handheld, or for things like resilient position navigation and technologies that exploits some of the infrastructure in space. So that's the landscape. This is how we work, and we're really focused on making those clusters successful in the UK. But there are still some strategic discussion points, and we've heard many of them over the last 2 days. and things that we should probably be doing together. Orbital filings, spectrum policy, spectrum considerations, space debris, sustainability and mitigation. We've got global challenges that are not unique to any single country, and we need to be looking at how do we use space to solve those challenges. Things like the applications, how do we deal with these potential challenges of climate change. One of the considerations here is we've got skills shortages, and that's true across the board. I think it's beholden on us to create the environment and enthusiasm for becoming engineers and scientists and financiers and service providers and business developers that actually are going to take space to the world. I think one of the considerations here is understanding the environment. The UK has done a significant mapping of capability, and I've put a link to there. You should go and have a look at it. And it helps to understand where you might need to go to actually build partnerships. And some of these opportunities, we really have to operate on a global scale. You know, the challenges are not unique to any country. We need to be able to look at collaboration. Really successful innovation depends upon this. We need to address international regulatory challenges and coordinate. We have a shared culture and heritage, and we should explore that and celebrate it. I think one of the key fundings, if we're going to work together as nations, we need to make it easy for organizations, that's research communities and industrial communities, to work together, and funding can help to catalyze this. And I'd like to think perhaps we can explore what the free trade agreement that will come into effect very soon, I hope, will mean in terms of the ability to work together. If we get this right, we can truly innovate for a better world empowered by space. So that's just a little introductory section from me and some of the things that we're doing in the UK. And it'd be great to understand how do we work together more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So we'll continue with the panel now and pick up some questions on Paul's presentation in a minute. So I'm joined now by Mr. Mudit Narain, Consultant, Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology, and also Dr. Sudheer Kumar, CBPO, ISRO. Would you like to just say a few words about how important clusters are to you both? What do you think are the characteristics of clusters that work well? And maybe you would start, please, if you will.
Thank you. Your structure was very good. Thanks for this chance. I am here as consultant from this foundation, but also have had a past of an engagement with the Indian Defense Innovation Body called Innovations for Defense Excellence, where I continue to have an advisory role. And we've seen 2 or 3 things in terms of, so that body is about 5 years old. The startup ecosystem in India is about 15 years old. And a few things that we've seen when it comes to clusters around innovation. One, that Indian clusters come up organically without as much government support as in other countries around inorganic seeds, which is completely unintended, unintentional investments of some kinds. And the two clusters that I like to talk about very frequently are, of course, the startup cluster in Bangalore and an education cluster in Kota, both of which were built around old public sector investments in the pre-91 economy in India, but which then over time got their own life. Kota was an industrial sector which lost relevance as electronics came in, which led to a lot of education and a lot of the older staff moving towards educating people. And that is now one of the best clusters that you can think about. Not one you think about when it comes to manufacturing, but education for sure. And Bangalore, again, was built around public sector investments, whether it is in the DPSUs, HAL and all, a lot of the work around ISRO. And that led to 2 generations of Indians who had been educated, had a science and technology background, and whose children in the young generation in the early 90s did not have assured public sector careers. And that's where the economy picked up just in time to fulfill the need of the Y2K issues and so on, and that's how the IT economy picked up. So these 2 examples are, in a sense, examples where inadvertent or unintended investments of a different kind led to a revolution of a different kind. But what does that teach us in terms of if a state government today is trying to seed a new cluster? The two or three things they need entirely, and I'm just taking forward from Dr. Paul's points around talent, capital, and shared services. Talent needs two broad things to move to a city which is not culturally its own, a comfortable city and spousal job opportunities, both of which become barriers for state governments to address. It's not, neither of these things, well, maybe the comfortable city is, but spousal job opportunities are not something state governments can address ex ante. Capital ideally should not be something that the government is interfering much in, except for maybe very early stage innovation capital. But that gets attracted when there is talent and shared services of some kind. So the final point being shared services. What are the shared services that a government can provide to seed a cluster? We are seeing some examples. We have the FinTech Valley coming up in Andhra Pradesh. We were actually expecting to have a speaker from Andhra Pradesh. We also have deep tech electric vehicles cluster coming up in Madras around IIT Chennai. Both of those centers, the state governments and IIT in Chennai's case, were able to provide basic testing, basic services, sometimes even space in the case, space not in the sector we're talking about, but office space and comfortable areas for people to work in, which allowed a lot more fintech companies to go to Andhra Pradesh. And in Chennai, it's been a mix of both talent and shared services around IIT Madras. So one or two major investments in terms of office space, in terms of some labs, in terms of maybe access to some easy early stage innovation capital, can get a critical mass of innovators attracted to a city. And usually that's enough to get more interest going, because it's still an emerging developing economy with a lot of markets which are still underserved, undersaturated, and there is a lot of high return to addressing new markets rather than creating new markets, addressing existing markets than creating new markets. So that allows investment to enter into a few companies which are often clustered. I often also take the example of telecom companies in India before the Chinese dominance in the last few years, but the entire telecom manufacturing industry came from IIT Chennai. And that again was built around innovation and research and the ability to attract talent, young engineers to IIT Chennai, IIT Madras, and to have a place where they could comfortably come and build companies. And that has led to a few more examples, and I believe that the resurgence of Indian telecom industry around Chennai and Bangalore will again be built on the services and access to testing provided by Chennai. So those are the kinds of things how India has seen clusters come up. So I would say organic clusters around very inorganic seeds, very unintentional seeds. And now we are starting to see a lot more state governments interested. You have defense corridors coming up in Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh, both of which are focusing on shared services for MSMEs. And I believe that is the right model. What they will still need to solve for are spousal job opportunities, which becomes a very big barrier, especially when you're attracting couples with two careers, and comfortable living spaces, living in cities. So those are two things which cities should really focus on.
That's great. Can you add some words now, please, from Israel?
Yeah. Thank you. The Harwell cluster, what Paul is talking about, I took that example in several fora because that is one of the best cluster. Probably what Mudit is talking about, the clusters are basically a concept where a group of intellectuals will come together and work for because I basically a part of the health cluster in Bangalore, that's what he was mentioning about. But today if you see so far in the last 6 decades, Indian space evolution, you should say, all the companies, whether it is MSMEs or corporates, they've been habituated like a suppliers. And the competition was because L1 was the concept for government. See, obviously the entire business has to be shared amongst at least one or two, whoever backs the contract. But the cluster concept and everybody, if you say, I can name the companies I have personally visited, huge infrastructure is there in India today. Be it clean rooms or be it checkout systems or be it manufacturing systems, be it testing systems. But of course, this is all involved in the huge infrastructure. If the infrastructure, the concept of Harwell cluster is a group of companies joined together, shared the investment and created a couple of, let us say, facilities to be jointly used. That is a beautiful concept. But such a concept now has to come to India. Basically, the startups who are looking for, if they tag up with the government, even if it is ISRO, what happens is ISRO mechanism of costing, mechanism of allowing them is not, will definitely not so, let us say, easy, because even though ease of doing business is one the criteria, but some procedures will be there. Even to put up a note and cycling, it takes minimum time. Even it could be a 1 hour, or it could be, it cannot be just like that over phone. A CEO is decide, yes, guy, you can just walk in and you can do the job. Probably this is what the concept we are propagating. In fact, I was talking to all corporates. I was telling them, you make your facilities available, throw it, whether it is a cost basis or cost plus basis, to the individual companies. It could be startups, or could be budding academia, or could be let us say some kind of entrepreneurs who are making the POC. Definitely the cluster concept only has to be there in India to encourage the budding startups to make use of the facilities, to avoid the duplication of the facilities, because resource is nobody else, it is nation's property. And one company is let us say free of things, having invested, nothing revenue is coming out, that is not good for them also. The concept, Harwell concept should be adopted for the Indian satellite industry per se, because I am not talking about the launch vehicle industry. Launch vehicle industry by and large, it would be a different altogether a phenomena. Morning also it was telling, especially for the electronic industry and satellite manufacturing industry and application industry. The clusters may not be in the similar lines like what the Harwell cluster at one location, entire facilities would be there. It could be a distributed kind of facility arrangement, but because because of the landscaping, because UK is a small, it's not even equivalent to one of the biggest city in India, probably that concept would go ill. On the other day, last month I was going to Connect concert, I was in Toulouse. That is another beautiful concept. So such kind of hybridization, I don't foresee that exactly one-to-one it could be adopted, but the concept, the cluster concept is now becoming order of the day, and we are also, ISRO is promoting, including our own let us say facilities to be made use of, to be made applicable for the MSMEs or companies. This is the wonderful idea, this is the order of the day, and this only gives the what you call beautiful economical benefits to the entire community. Thank you.
That's great. Can each of you comment on whether it's better if clusters are closer to business, to government, or to universities? Who would like to go first?
See, the clusters today, the infrastructure has been built. If it is a starting point, let us say it could be, now in India there is a concept SEZ. SEZ operates a lot of let us say benefits to the industries. They offer beautiful infrastructure, they offer beautiful, let us say, other facilities, they reach out to the people. It is not necessary that it should be near to a particular city or to a particular academia, because connectivity exists. That's what we are talking about. Internet connectivity exists, they can talk to each other. I don't see the location would be a problem, and as long as it's a distributed thing, always a benefit will be there for the adjoining people to make use of that facility. But definitely, yes, if it is at one point, the transmission, the transport and other logistics will be optimized, but I don't think it will be a hindrance.
So my question would have a split answer. If the cluster is aiming, or if whoever is designing the cluster is aiming at expanding an existing market, you're better off locating it close to the industry. If you're looking at building a future-looking sector, which is innovating, which is looking at creating new products and services and creating new companies and markets, then you're better off engaging with universities, innovative universities, because that's when you're looking 15, 20 years into the future. Definitely not near the government. The government should be, by definition, providing the same facilities around all of its jurisdiction. But if there are areas where government regulation plays an important part, then I personally believe startup companies or small companies which are part of a cluster should not be interfacing with the government directly. The returns to them are very low. Leave that job to somebody else, like an association which is hosting this conference, or to some other body, rather than engaging in yourself. And that should be the only reason why you're dealing with government. Your own businesses, your own products and services should be enough for you to get a market. So if you're addressing an existing market, industries, if you're looking to build a future market, universities.
As such, if you see the distribution of, probably in the next session I would be talking about the distribution of Indian industry, especially the space industry. If you see, there is a notion that everything is south dominant. Okay, there is a reason for that one, because your indirect question to you is spaceport is in South India, and many of the satellite, because obviously the facility should be near to the, see why steel industry is in particular region, because of vicinity of the raw materials and etc. By virtue of that, to avoid that major transportation, whether it is a satellite container or a solid propellant stage, it is by and large it is more located in the southern region. But if you say the advantages, now government is proposing to have the economy to be distributed across the country uniformly. They are developing the SEZ, economic zones everywhere. He was talking about UP. UP is very aggressive. Maharashtra is again aggressive, because not necessarily that if you see the industry, it is spread across, even though it is dominated in the South South India. But we have good number of industries in Faridabad region, we have in Kolkata region, we have in Gujarat region, we have in Maharashtra region. So not necessarily that this particular thing for small, where transportation is not a big cost. So the existing facilities should be made use of. And incidentally, I want to share with you, government is proposing, there is an IIT Harwell, for the interest of the people I am telling. IIT Harwell has come up with a proposal to ISRO to join hands with the government of India to make such kind of clusters. And in pockets, good IITs are there, they are all national fame IITs. The professors came out of the colleges, they have treasure of knowledge. They are forming groups in different cities based on their, let us say, they stay, and they are forming the knowledge centers. So in a way, if everything get connected, maybe some mechanism is required to get connected, the knowledge centers, the center of excellencies, the industries where you have some kind of, let us say, free resources, including the ISRO centers. I think it should become a good mix, provided if all these things get connected. That is the order of the day.
Thank you. Technology, isn't it lovely? I think I'd like to answer the question in a couple of ways. There's a thematic and a systematic consideration here, or a systemic consideration. From a systemic consideration, when we're looking at the translation of research through an innovation life cycle, it's really important to incentivize the research to be industrially focused, to have a purpose. And so from the perspective of making sure that happens, government has a role. Whether it's state government or federal government, national government, to say, this is where we want to go, this is where the challenge, and these are the challenges we want the research to be focused around, and these are the mechanisms. In order to access the funding, you need to have an industrial steering board, something that actually is respecting the needs of industry to move it forwards. And that's kind of systemic, it's across the board, but it's one of the things that's really important. Thematically, when we're looking at the space domain, I think we mustn't forget that it's not just about the infrastructure in space. It's about the way in which you deliver services to the end users. And that often it's about product engineering and scale from the perspective of delivering people things on which they're going to get the services, but it's also about the innovation in the digital domain as well. And one of the things that we did in the Catapult from the early days was trying to make those digital facilities and capabilities accessible to everyone who wants to innovate. And that's been enormously successful in creating the knowledge base, if you like, and the economy, the actual exchange economy with regard to access to particular microservices, if you like. So I think it's important to have both dimensions covered and recognize that space isn't the only dimension when you're talking about satellite services delivering to against some of these major challenges.
I think it's also clear from the Harwell site that there are significant facilities such as the European Space Agency 5G, 6G Centre, such as RAL, as well as the Satellite Applications Catapult. If we were to say to both of you, which international linkages would you value most, cluster to cluster? So Harwell to X, where X was a location in India. Would you have any preferences in deciding that? And then maybe we ask some questions of our Indian colleagues on that.
Oh, that's a fascinating question. I think one of the things that we try and do as the Catapult is, let's call it impedance matching. What do the smaller companies need, right? Because access to major scientific facilities is actually quite challenging, so we try to create the bridge. Touching on the point about satellite services and are not just about the space aspect, I think perhaps we're looking at some of the IT innovations and the artificial intelligence aspects. And where is the cluster that takes place? Is it in Hyderabad or somewhere where, you know, that there is significant energy and a knowledge base that can really exploit satellite services moving forward? But I don't think it's going to be a single link. I think it's going to have to be something where there's an understanding that there's opportunities for people to move, to come and explore. Working in the UK, working in India, we need to create an open channel for this to take place, and not necessarily be too focused on a particular domain, but putting something systemic in place moving forward as part of our agreement between nations.
I agree with you, Dr. Paul, fully. See, today is, we were talking about the same kind of concepts in Bangalore Space Expo a couple of 1 or 2 months back. There would not be any one-to-one, let us say, interaction. Could be Harwell is a cluster by location at one location probably. I think the answer for you is being spread across. Let us say you take quantum communication. Quantum communication center of excellence could be at one location. If you again propulsion technologies could be one location. But all these, let us say, people who are needing this particular technology center of excellences, if they wanted to tie up with Harwell or connect Canis or some whatever the system that is available, Australia is now coming up with a big proposal to start their own clusters. You know, Germany, Israel is there, is already in place, giving a lot of technologies available to the external world. Of course, Netherlands, such kind of small space agencies also now looking for such kind of tie-ups. Yes, a open-mindedness is required. Give and take is required. It is not that alone I look for a business, because you have to give something, somewhere informal kind of academia, research kind of clustering, if it is possible. That could be the best way to penetrate into the other nations. Then industry should get connected. Rather than going to interagency level or interministerial level, if the industry connects could be established between the two countries, that would be the best way of getting connected, because the industries would be looking at a revenue perspective.
Not in terms of countries, but let's say if you were to think about active clusters, if there is a central body or a team of people at that cluster, it could think about acting like the corporate business development side, which will require them to know the capabilities of all of their companies, which can then be marketed or sold across to a different entity. And very often what we've seen is there is no unifying thread, no common thread which can identify here are the 3 things that our cluster can do. The only example that I can think about is actually Coimbatore, which is Western Tamil Nadu. And they have a very active association which actually goes out and actively does that. So that kind of a thing can be very productive, but it requires a strong association or a strong central team to do that, and very little incentive because the companies don't see immediate benefit out of sharing information. So if that can be achieved in some way, a lot of these clusters can become competitive with large companies which already have these kinds of central coordination functions across them.
So while you've got the microphone, it seems to me that clusters can concentrate on startups or spin-outs, but sometimes they don't deal with scale-ups. How do we move the needle from startups to scale-ups through the clusters that exist? What else do we need to do to go from startups to scale-ups?
So I hesitate from classifying separate startups as a different category of companies. India has done it, and we've been talking about it. But I believe the reason our previous generation companies did not scale up to the point was lack of capital and the lack of knowledge on how do you do multiple gating investments. And I think at this point, there are no organic barriers to scale up for companies. There is adequate access to talent, adequate access to capital. So there isn't much that requires intervention. That may not be a very popular opinion, but I believe we're at a point where we will see, and we are seeing in some ways in things like e-commerce and marketplaces like taxi sharing and all, but now you'll start seeing that in deep tech, led by, I strongly believe, electric vehicles, not the topic of our conversation today, but electric vehicles, maybe in 4 or 5 years, green hydrogen, will be areas where startups will be able to see scale comparative to the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 200, built by access to venture capital and then growth capital. And that engine is now starting to work, at least in India and even in the US. I don't know about UK enough to talk smartly, but these two countries are, and a few others like Israel and all, are starting to provide the capital and the talent to bring small companies up to competitive levels. And we'll see that increasingly in a lot of areas, because I also believe that larger companies tend to get bogged down by a lot of internal bureaucracy and procedures and processes, which is good to go from 1 to 100. But if you don't keep the culture of going, which takes you from 0 to 1, then you get stuck somewhere between 100 and it's difficult to go forward. If the government was to make a few interventions, making it easy for early stage investors to stay on in a, I mean, it could be different categories of shares, it could be a way of having type A, type B shares, but having early stage investors who know the culture and who know the founders from early on, stay on without having to dilute too much, would be something, but that's again a very tangential point. I believe the core points are talent and capital, which are getting addressed, and the venture capital world in the last few years has shifted the needle to a point where we can be confident we will see this in the coming few years.
I partially agree with Mudit, because there is no much, see, startup definition, if you see in the Indian context, maybe 10 years, maybe 100 crores Kannur INR, Indian rupees. But today, even if it becomes unicorns also, startup is startup by definition. They have become unicorns. Today, we see, especially I personally see, the scaling up, whether it could be, there are some technologies available at TRL3, scaling up to TRL7 and putting it into use, or custom productionization. Such kind of things, startups are doing much better job than corporates. Why? Because as Mudit was telling, corporates have got their own, conventional way of thinking. Let us say if some kind of innovation has to be adopted, research has to be adopted, they may hesitate to take a technology from X company or Y company to scale it up. But there is no distinction, as far as me is concerned, between a startup and a successful startup who's landing at different TRLs and scaling it up. I don't think startups would have, in my opinion, a better leverage and better, let us say, success rate even than corporates. And it is perfectly correct, the startups have got leverage or freedom to go and request for something which corporate hesitate.
So one of the things I think that's important when we transition from startup to scale up is to understand the market aspects and the globalization. So I think the critical thing here is not just about the technology and getting it to a level of maturity, it's about understanding how you operate on an international stage. And this is where I think there's significant potential opportunities for us to work, providing those support frameworks moving forwards so that companies can scale. But it's also about informed regulation and international position on standards. And I think it can't be those individual companies that do that, right? They won't have the necessary impact, but collectively we can do this. And I think this is why we need the kind of orchestration level and the recognition that there is that there's essentially a set of conditions that have to be established to allow scale up to take place. And I think that's beholden on us as the support organisations to help put that in place.
I think another supplement also is the investment angle. And I'd quite like to understand whether the investment mechanisms exist in this area. Clearly in the UK we have Seraphim Capital, which is specialist in space investment in the innovative and creative areas. Do you have the investment capital to really help the scale-ups?
Yes. See, investments are concerned today, for the startups, especially if you if you talk, yes, venture capitalists, they are coming forward, but there is a notion which I myself was expressed, but it was denied by many people, that there is a ceiling more than 20 millions if they are seeking for. Indian investors are not ready to forward. But there was a contention for that statement, and people said that it is more than even 20 million investors are available in India. But incidentally, I just wanted to just make a note. I think yesterday, Joseph Joshi from Gift City, he was talking about even, let us say one is FDI. FDI's other foreign, let us say regulations or something like that to come to India. This gift city kind of thing, Singapore concept, they have been implemented in the Ahmedabad, where the foreign investors can come and they treat that gift city as if it is a foreign domain, not getting bogged down to the Indian rules, how to enter, how to seek several permissions. So such kind of opportunities are now they have introduced very recently. The startups, if they wanted to get, let us say 100 millions or even more, the people are ready to come forward and invest. I don't think investments would be a problem. I don't think, again, small scale investors, based on the scaling up, what I was telling, the startups looks scaling up as an investment, not as a market. Whether they get a market, assured market or not, some of the startups, they're investing into the knowledge is being invested. They're making it to their level and looking for the market. Many startups are like that. So I don't think investment is a problem in India.
Mudit, do you agree?
Strongly agree, actually. Parallel to this session, there's another session where you have companies pitching to investors. And I was talking to both investors and companies. There is a lot of excitement. Just a couple of weeks ago, we heard a true blue regular venture capital fund in India investing in a quantum communication company. Of course, we have had examples of funds investing in the 4 or 5 well-known Indian space companies like Bellatrix, Agnikul, Manastu and all. So there is now increasingly an interest, there is appetite. Of course, there are questions about markets in more deep tech areas, but I'm starting to see that transition in at least the Indian venture capital space and maybe in the US, where the appetite to go from e-commerce or information, what I call information asymmetry plays, which are basically making some existing markets more efficient, from there to connecting new products, new services to capital. And that transition we are seeing underway. I think what we saw in the last decade was basically the first phase of startup growth. And now you'll see a more nuanced, a more technologically aware second phase. Are there barriers? The barriers, especially in regulated industries, are around testing and certification. And if those issues can be sorted out, the confidence of the investor in coming into a regulated market or an entity playing in a regulated market will increase. This will go across areas like agriculture, it will go across areas like space, energy, transport, telecom. All of these sectors have a certain layer of uncertainty built around where the regulation will go. So if that's where governments can focus, I can foresee a lot of investment moving towards new technology-driven startups.
Great. So just a wrap-up question for all of you. I thought as we've been celebrating Diwali this week, it'd be nice to think about Diwali next year. So I'd like to grant you all a Diwali wish. And I would like to ask the question, how would you use that wish to build innovation ecosystems through space clusters? What would that wish be if it came to you within a year's time? What real measure would you expect to have in place between now and then to make these innovation ecosystems stronger and stronger for the space clusters themselves?
I have the mic, so I'll take it. And my wish is towards Dr. Sudheer, a regulatory sandbox for all the 4 spaces: launch, SATCOM, TTC, and Earth observation. A regulatory sandbox either run by ISRO or run by ISRO with some other partners, so that the regulatory uncertainties can be eliminated, would be my wish for Diwali next year.
Thank you, Mudit. I think your wish is going to become true. Today, the ISRO is taking a different shape. It is not only as a government regulator, as a promoter also. Since we have taken the promotion also as a prime concern, we are looking in 2 ways. One is releasing the challenges and inviting such kind of, yesterday some startup guy was telling why in India, in the round table, why in India the concepts proposed by startups will not be taken. Yes, that is on. If some startups has got some good ideas which are useful for either defense or for civilian applications, it is very welcoming signatures sign. We will take it and we will facilitate them. Other thing is forward approach, other one is reverse approach. Now ISRO and the defense space is also throwing challenges in a broader sense, and it will going to create multiple applications, not multiple, multiplied, let's say, opportunities. Obviously, when they come forward, Kandare Sahib is here, was part of the system, and is already IDEX is on. Several hundreds of opportunities are coming. Even 2 to 3 startups come forward for each and every opportunity. 300 to 400 opportunities or to projects are going to be thrown. Definitely, they require the support from government, from industry. I think next year you would see 3x times the multiplied scenario when you see the next Diwali. Thank you.
That's very exciting. What's your Diwali wish, Paul?
Can I have 3? Rub the lamp 3 times. First of all, I hope that we have a wish for a really compelling free trade agreement for our countries to work together. The second is that we actually take the opportunity to build a bridge between India and the UK at the industrial level and the academic level and the government level. So a persistent set of MOUs that can actually understand how can we work together at all those 3 levels. And the third thing I'd like, and maybe more tactically, is for some of these companies that are listed up here, to be such as SES and Hughes and the like, that are actually to get behind a future networks program, research program. There is one in existence already with British Telecom and some Indian partners, and I'd like to see that scaled up and taken into the future to include satellites as well.
Thanks very much to all of you. Can I just say to your slides, Paul, are you happy to share those with the organisers who may wish to
yes, indeed.
share with the audience?
And any questions, of course, can come through to me.
And also, I think one of the slides showed the UK space directory, and I think it would be very nice to exchange the UK space directory with the Indian space directory you referred to briefly.
Sure, there should not be any problem, I foresee. Let the conversation happens through embassy. Amrut and these people are in touch with us. We'll definitely happy to share. And in fact, I was the first person to conduct US industry meet in 2019 at Taj Extension, Bangalore. I hope such kind of things will happen in the future also.
So I'm in Bangalore in 3 weeks' time. I'll send you an email between now and then. Can we please thank all our speakers for today for being so open on the subject of clusters and ecosystems. Thank you. So that ends the formal proceedings for this morning in this room. Lunch is now served, so please enjoy your lunch. Feel free to grab the speakers if you've got any questions we didn't have time to take. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So ladies and gentlemen, let's once again put our hands together for that wonderful session. And we now break for lunch and see you back for the next session on leveraging industry base for national space capabilities in this very hall. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, we also take this opportunity to welcome Shri Gopal Mohanji from Delhi government, who's amongst us. Let's put our hands together to welcome him. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for sparing your time and gracing this occasion.